Hello and welcome to our final week of this theme as we are celebrating the Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage. And so we know that there's so much that we could cover in this topic in celebrating our siblings, but there's also only so many weeks that we can do. And so we hope that you've had a variety of books. And just so you know, so you remember, this is not the end all be all of the research that you can do. You can take time to go to the library with your parents, with your family, with friends, maybe talk to your teachers if you're really interested in the subject and you want to just learn more about the heritage and the culture and the traditions. And today's book I want to talk a little bit about before we begin because it is a very different type of book. First of all, it does talk about some really sensitive subjects. We are talking about the Vietnam War. We're talking about refugees going to a new country. And we know that that can be a really difficult conversation. We also know that this isn't the story for every single person. We all have different stories of how we came to this country, where our roots started. That's all so different for each person. So it's just a reminder that this isn't everyone's stories, but it is a story that is important telling. And the book itself has a very different style. It actually does not have words to the actual story. So I'm going to read you a note from the author before we actually go through the images and the pages before we begin that. So I am heading to the back of the book. It is where we get a little bit of a description and an author's note. And so here we go. This is the author. It says, "My first and only baby photo, taken in Malaysia, in a Malaysian refugee camp." So we see this is when they were very young. And the author's note says, I know it's a little bright so you can't see it, but the author's note says, "I was 2 when my family fled Vietnam. Cornered by fear and desperation, my parents risked the unknown. They boarded a small fishing boat with 27 other passengers. Actually, 28. My mother, afraid of being left behind, did not tell my father that she was 3 months pregnant with my little sister. I have no recollection of this time. For years, I didn't understand the sad silence that followed my questions about the war and our journey across the South China Sea. At the end of the Vietnam War, supporters of the South Vietnamese government were persecuted by the triumphant North Vietnamese guerrilla fighters called the Viet Cong. Death tolls continued to rise even after the war ended. Over 1.6 million refugees escaped Vietnam, the majority by boat, with nothing more than their emotional baggage and horrific memories. Both of my parents left their families behind. It is estimated that 400,000 Vietnamese people died at sea from starvation, dehydration, pirate attacks, illness, and exposure to the elements. Those who survived the voyage found themselves in overcrowded refugee camps with food shortages, poor sanitary conditions, and no running water. After 4 days at sea, my parents and I landed in Malaysia. For 5 months, we lived in a refugee camp with thousands of others seeking asylum. The lines were long as people waited to have their papers processed. With each passing day, their despair and uncertainty grew. My parents were eventually given the choice of resettling in Australia, Canada, or the United States. They decided to rebuild their life in Canada. Long before the war, she said, the only invasions were by ants looking for food. Her mother would set out bowls of sugar water to rid the house of the pests. As a child, Mom spent carefree afternoons rescuing them. In return, the ants rescued her when we fled Vietnam. That night, she got lost in the tall grass. By the light of the moon, she spotted a trail of ants and followed them to a riverbed where our escape boat waited. As I pieced together my family's journey to Canada, I was struck by the traits shared by ants and refugees. As one of nature's smallest creatures, ants must often move and rebuild their colonies when they're attacked or their homes are destroyed. Like refugees, ants have scattered to all parts of the world, except North and South poles, which are too cold. Wherever they find themselves, they adapt, contribute, and make a substantial impact on the local environment. Working together, they show great determination and resilience in tough times. They have no fear of hardship and are willing to sacrifice themselves to ensure the safety of their families above all else. Every family has stories that are told and retold. My mother told me this one as a lesson in kindness and karma, and now I am retelling it to my little one as a story about how deep her roots run and about the strength and courage of the people that she calls Grandpa and Nana. And you'll see as we begin this book, The Paper Boat, A Refugee Story by Thao, that it's a little different than most books we have read. It is actually much more like a comic book in how it's illustrated. The Paper Boat. I'll get a little bit closer here so that you can see these images. So it begins with seeing some of the ants. We see hands trying to swat them away. There's food and there's soup. There's ants everywhere. We see someone looking a little nervous around the ants. Ants getting into food. Family eating together. And we see military tank behind. We see running. We see gathering of supplies like money, IDs, valuables. We see suitcases, families hugging, people looking nervous and concerned. And we see our author here with her mom, grandma, dad, I'm guessing. We see the tall grass that they're walking through. Then we see some military feet, boots, hiding. Needing to be quiet. More hiding behind the grass, just trying to stay safe. Our author and their mom. We see moonlight shining through. And another little trail of ants. Following the ants, leading to the riverbed with the boat. We see them waiting, sitting, hiding. And then we see a different type of boat, a rescue boat. We see them walking to the boat. And the boat sailing away. We see the ants with the little paper boat that she had created. Then we see the ants on the boat on the water. And we see the sun, hot sun. The ants look thirsty. We see birds. The ants looking a little nervous. See some of the ants being taken by the birds. The ants being sad. The ants continue their boat journey. See them grabbing little droplets of rain to be able to drink. And we see them in a thunderstorm, lightning, the waves looking scary and big. The sun coming back out. See some of the ants who fell off the boat. And finally we see some ants who made it. And more ants who made it. Leaves back at the table. And we see the food. Ants trying to get food again. We see our author's family eating. Her little sister's here now. Looks like we've got a picture of Grandma. We see lots of different families here. As we read in our author's note, they lived for 5 years in a refugee community, meaning refugees, people who had to leave their homes from lots of different countries. We see them living together. The end. Get to the author's note again. We see some clippings of newspapers from that time. This is the 70s. The end. So as we talked about a little bit at the beginning, this is a difficult subject to talk about. But just because it's hard to talk about doesn't mean it's something we should ignore. It's an important conversation, and one that many people from not just our towns, our cities, our country, but all over the world. There are still many refugee stories. People who are trying to leave their country because of war or oppressive governments or natural disasters. No matter the reason why, they're choosing to leave, which is never the easy answer. They're leaving family behind. They're leaving a place they knew. They're leaving their language. that they're used to speaking and coming to a brand new place that is so different from home. And so it's important to remember to have empathy and compassion and understanding as best as possible for those who have to live these stories. In this story, we hear our author was just a little child when their family had to go through this, but we know that even in this day in 2021, there are still stories of young children and people of all ages having to leave their countries to other countries in order to try and be safe and rebuild. And so I hope that we can take a little bit more time today and this week to just think about all of our siblings in this world who are having to live through these times. And like we said at the beginning, this story is not every person's story, but it's an important one to talk about. So thank you for joining us for the 4 weeks of book readings and conversations, and we hope that this has been a start and hopefully given you a little bit of a spark to want to learn more, to do your own research, to read more books, to watch documentaries, to ask people about their stories whenever that's appropriate. We thank you for being here, and we look forward to next month's theme, and we'll be back here again meeting and doing our recorded videos as well. We'll see you all soon. Bye bye.